Hey, this is a lesson on loops, like the while loop. We'll look at the generic while loop here and its corresponding flowchart. Loops are what's known as selection or control statements. Remember, selection statements select the code to execute. In this case of the loop, it will select the code to execute over and over and over again. Selection statements are also sometimes called control statements because they control the path the program takes. It's going to control a path that repeats the same code over and over again. So let's get started on this generic while loop and see how it works. I'll start the animation. And you'll see while some true-false statement, while some condition or Boolean value. You can see here, just like with the if statement, inside the parentheses should be something that evaluates to true or false. Now this initial line I drew here is just to show you that this diamond in the flowchart corresponds to this true-false statement. We're going to assume this is a true while statement, and when it's true, what will happen is, like the if statement, it'll go inside and execute the while block. It'll execute the code inside the while statements. This initial line here shows you that the code is going to go in and execute the statement. This line over here is showing you that this rectangular box is the statements that make up our loop right here. After it's done executing the statements in the while block, it'll hit that closed curly brace. And here's where something happens very different than with the if statement. Here, it hits that closed curly brace and wraps back around and goes back up to the while statement. So it literally jumps backwards in the code back up to the while statement. And when it does that, it tests the condition again. It tests the true-false condition, and if it is true, what do you think is going to happen? I'm also showing you here over on the flowchart, it's basically following this line right here, up and back to the condition. So we're back at the true-false condition right here. It's true, so once again we dive into the block of statements. These codes will execute every time that condition is true. On the flowchart, you can see it's exiting the diamond here off that point. Let's label true. Follow the code on the flowchart, please. So after executing that block of statements, once again we'll hit that closing curly brace, and every time it will loop back up to the while statement. And this line over here is showing you that, oh, I'm heading back to the true-false statement. Next step, we evaluate the true-false condition once again. See why it's called a loop? It's sitting here spinning on this code, executing that block of statements as long as the while statement condition is true. Once again, it's true. I execute the block of statements here. I'm showing you on the flowchart the path this flowchart will take. Hits the end of the block, hits the end of the curly brace, the closed curly brace. Says go back up to the while statement. Still true. So all we're going to do is spin while this thing is true. We're going to spin in this loop executing this block of statements. Hit the end of the loop, spin back up to the top. When we get back up, ooh, something different just happened there. This time when we spin back up to the while loop, let's assume the while loop this time is false. The condition or the Boolean in parentheses is a false statement. As a false statement, just like with the if statement, we want to exit the while loop. It's time to get out. And that's what this line is showing you. When that condition goes false, not only will we exit the loop, the program will continue on. You'll also see over here on the flowchart that it decided to take this path out of the diamond, the one labeled false, and will exit the code and continue on. That is the generic while loop. It will spin and execute those statements while the condition is true. But as soon as that condition goes false, it exits the loop and continues on with the program. So let's move on and look at a real example. Here's some executable code for a while loop. Let's trace it and see how it's going to run. I'll start the animation. Bang. And the first thing we're going to do is set count equal to 0. Count equal to 0. We'll initialize what's called the iteration variable. Count is the iteration variable that will control how many times this loop spins. We'll put a 0 in it to start. We'll hit our while statement while this condition is true or false. Now, notice how we retrieve the value 0 from the count variable, and what we're evaluating here is 0 less than 3. Well, we should know from the 3rd grade 0 less than 3 is a true statement. As a true statement, you know what's going to happen. It's going to execute the code inside the while loop. So it dives inside the while block, does the system out print line in the loop. You can see the path that the code took. Because the statement was true, it came into this path. You can see in the loop is what should be printed, and you can see out here on my output, in the loop is being printed. Ooh, well, my little cursor hides behind there. Alright, sneaky cursor. After it executes that line of code, goes down to the next line of code in the block. Count equals count plus 1. Very important to change the iteration variable. You can see here that count just changed from 0 to 1. So the value of count is 1 at this point. And we'll hit the end of the loop. And as we saw earlier, if we hit the end of that loop, we spin back up and go back and do the while statement again. This time the condition is slightly changed. We're now looking at 1 less than 3 because 1 is now in the variable count. 1 less than 3 is a true statement, which means execute the code in the while loop. It dives inside the code. You can see another execution of in the loop. You can see the second in the loop is printed into our output. The program is looping again because the condition was true. We'll update count. Count equals count plus 1. It is extremely important to change the count variable, the iteration variable, while inside the loop. You can see that it's updated to 2 now. Hit the end of the loop, and what happens? We spin back up and execute the while statement once again. That is the definition of the loop. It's going to repeat this code over and over and over again until that condition goes to false. At this point, that condition is not false. Looking at the variable count, it has the value of 2. So our relational operator is 2 less than 3. That is still very much true. As a true statement, it's going inside the loop. For a 3rd time now, it's printing in the loop or executing the statement in the loop a 3rd time. You can see on our output, we see in the loop a 3rd time. This code is spinning and repeating this code over and over again. But don't worry, I think something's going to change soon. Count equals count plus 1. We have to change this iteration variable inside the loop. It just changed to 3. That's very interesting. But even though it's changed to 3, we're still looping back up. It's an automatic. When you hit the last curly brace of a while loop, it's automatically going to spin back up at least one more time. But this time it will be different, I promise. When we get there this time, the value of count has changed. Count is now 3, so the condition 3 less than 3 has become a false condition. What do we know? When the condition goes to false, just like the if statement, we are going to break out of that while loop. We are going to do not pass go, do not collect $200. Follow this line from the false condition out of the loop. Notice how this arrow is below the curly brace. We will not hit the curly brace. We will jump out of the loop to the code below the curly brace. This loop is now done. Finito. Complete. So there you have it. That's a while loop. While it is true, it will execute a block of code. And as soon as the condition goes to false, the loop is done. Now, before I leave this code, let me talk about something very important when it comes to a loop. Count, in this example, is known as the iteration variable. To iterate means to loop. It's the same thing. The iteration variable has to be changed or modified or tweaked with 3 places in the loop. And it's very important that these three things happen if your loop's going to operate properly. Number one, the first thing you have to do to the iteration variable, or count, is initialize it. You have to give it a starting value. In this case, we decided 0 would be the starting value. The second thing you have to do to the iteration, or count variable in this case, is you've got to test that variable. You have to test it with a relational operator or some other operator that returns true, false. And as long as that returns true, we're spinning in the loop. When it goes to false, we're exiting the loop. And finally, the third thing that you have to do in order to get a loop to operate properly is you have to change the iteration variable. It is important that somewhere inside this loop, the value of count changes. If the value of count never changes, this never goes to false. So, there you have it. If you're writing a loop, before you run the code, check those three things. Did I initialize the variable? Did I test the variable? And did I change it? And if you're ever trying to debug the loop is not operating properly, check those 3 points. Where did you initialize the variable? Where did you test the count variable? And where did you change the iteration, or in this case, count variable? There you have it. Good luck. See you later.